cognitive dissonance theory. I've entitled this "The Worst Lie is the One You Tell Yourself." And you're going to see in the next couple minutes why that's true. I was really excited when I saw this come up because this is something that I've been interested in for a very long time. Actually, before I even knew what it was called, then I learned about the theory. Then I started this class, and I saw that it was one of the options we would have. So I was really hoping I could get this. So I don't have a degree in this field, but this is something that I've studied for a long time. And in the past few weeks, I put a lot of effort into studying this. Okay, now I've got something that I was trying to embed into here. Well, you know what? Wow, I really wanted to do that. Well, it's all right. It wasn't that important anyway. Okay, now let's move on. Oh wait, you've all been deceived. That wasn't what really happened. That was an example of cognitive dissonance theory. And I will explain that in just a moment. We'll come back to that. Why is it that I was so convinced for a moment that I needed that whatever little thing was put in there, and then all of a sudden, that's not so important anyway, because of cognitive dissonance theory. For reals now. Let's move on. What is cognitive dissonance theory? There's three main points that I'm going to be covering today. The first, what is cognitive dissonance theory? The second, how does it affect people? And the third, what can we do with this knowledge? What is cognitive dissonance theory? The first thing to know about it is a very, very old concept. The theory of cognitive dissonance actually far predates the name cognitive dissonance theory. It's actually something that's probably familiar to all of us. This is a little picture that someone did to illustrate the story of the fox and the grapes. This is the classic example that's almost always used to describe cognitive dissonance theory. In this story, a fox comes across some grapes hanging high on a vine. They look delicious, and he's completely convinced that that's what I want to eat. He tries and tries and tries. This is, by the way, one of Aesop's fables from ancient Greece. He tries to figure out how to get to the grapes. Finally, he realizes there's just no possible way I'm going to get to these. So what does he say? They're probably sour anyway. This is the source of the expression, sour grapes. If someone doesn't get what they want, all of a sudden, they never wanted it to begin with. This is cognitive dissonance theory. Now, it was formally described by Leon Festinger in the 1950s. Even though this is something that's been around for a long time, this guy's the first person to actually put it into a formal academic setting. The origin of it, he says it kind of came to him by accident. He was doing a study on student housing for Stanford University. It wasn't really a formal study. It was just they were trying to figure out how to make students the happiest in their housing. He found a couple of interesting things. People tend to form friendships by people they live closest to. The people who lived closest to the stairs had more friends. The people who lived on the first floor had more friends than the people on the upper floors. That's an interesting finding. How is it related to this? Well, he also found a separate thing that was unrelated. People tend to have values that are close to the values of their friends. How does this work out? If people form friends just by proximity, but their values are the same as their friends, is this a giant coincidence? Not really. He looked into this and he really mulled it over for actually several years. Another fortuitous thing happened. He happened to see a story about an apocalyptic group. They were expecting that aliens were going to come from outer space on a particular date, at a particular time, in UFOs, right before the end of the world. And they were going to rescue all the faithful members of this group. He actually was able to join this group, go to their meetings with another researcher and some students. They became members of this group, and they watched, and they were there when the date happened where the UFOs were supposed to come, and the UFOs didn't come. And the craziest thing about it, is the people who were part of this cult actually believed even stronger after it didn't happen. And their prophet made a new prophecy that God had saved us because we were so faithful. How does this work out? He further went and did some formal experiments to actually write a research paper on the subject. This is the seminal paper on the subject, and this is what everything derives from cognitive dissonance theory. And to make a further note, this is one of the best studied theories in psychology. It's gone over and over. There are books about cognitive dissonance theory. There are books about cognitive dissonance theory. There's books, a 50-year retrospective. It just goes on and on. Now, there are two very important parts to cognitive dissonance theory. The first, the existence of dissonance will motivate a person to try to reduce it. And I think this is a good time to try to define what dissonance is. Cognitive dissonance is when we hold two separate beliefs that cannot both be true. but we believe them both at the same time. I'll give you an example. One of the best cited examples in modern times is smoking. Pretty much everyone knows that smoking is unhealthy. Smoking is likely to kill you if you continue it. Yet, how many people smoke in America? Nearly 25%. A very large proportion, probably a good number of people in this very room. We know it's unhealthy, but we do it anyway. Why do we do it? We'll get back to that in a second. The second thing is, a person will try to avoid situations that will increase dissonance. So, the example that I use for this is, how many people watch cable news? And watch cable news? Do you watch all the channels of cable news, or do you have favorites? We tend to fall into camps. There are those of us who are the Fox News fans. There are those of us who are the MSNBC fans. Some people take the middle ground and go CNN. But not very many people will watch Glenn Beck on one program and, I don't think Keith Olbermann has a program anymore, but him on the other channel. Thank you. So, what people will do is, if they already have an idea that they somehow subconsciously know doesn't really make sense, they're not going to seek out places that are going to increase that dissonance. The reason for this is when we have cognitive dissonance, it can be nearly unbearable in our minds. It can be a very difficult situation because these two things need to resolve. What happens then? This is what I would put. How does it affect people? Irrational resolution of cognitive dissonance may have a benign effect. Now, an irrational resolution is when we resolve these two different dissonant elements in a way that doesn't really make sense. And sometimes it's not that big a deal. Let's say I'm going to Zippy's. I can't decide between the Korean fried chicken or Loco Moco. I don't know which one's better. Finally, I decide on the Korean fried chicken. Afterwards, that's what I really wanted the whole time. Well, who cares? It doesn't really make a big difference. There's also another result to this. Sometimes irrational resolution can have unhealthy effects, just like we were talking about with smoking. And there's a lot of other examples as well that I think we could probably think of if we thought about it for a second. Now, this is another thing. This is very important. If you're taking notes, make note of this. This is part of the formal theory. There's several ways to describe the resolution of cognitive dissonance, but this is probably the best model, I think. One is to change our perception of the dissonance. This is the most common. In the smoking example, it's not that I quit smoking. It's not that I learned that smoking is actually healthy. It's that, it's not so bad. This is the most common and the laziest. The second way is to change your belief. Now, if there were some new evidence to come out to say that actually smoking doesn't cause cancer, this would be the way to do it. This is actually pretty complex, and this is a little less common than changing perception, but it's not necessarily any better because sometimes this involves another layer of dissonance. The least common and probably the most effective is to change your action. If you have two different things that are actually dissonant, change it. Do something about it. My third point here is, what can we do with this knowledge? Understanding cognitive dissonance theory will help us understand other people. We'll be able to understand sometimes why other people do things that seem completely irrational. Here's my biggest point, though. Understanding cognitive dissonance theory can help us make better decisions for ourselves. I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we each have something that the dissonant element in our life. My example that I'm going to give to you is obviously, something you may not realize. There's a lot of studies that have been shown that people who are overweight tend to underreport what they eat. That's the short version. We could go into a lot more detail. The truth is, if you sit down at the end of the day and write down everything you've eaten, it's not all going to be on the list. But people who have given me advice on how to lose weight have said, report every single thing as you eat it. And I've done this before, and I'm happy to report to you, I lost about 40 pounds. So not only what you eat, but other lifestyle elements can work into this. Don't let cognitive dissonance theory or irrational resolution of cognitive dissonance rule your life. Now, I'd like to summarize. We talked about what is cognitive dissonance theory, we talked about how it affects people, and we talked about what we can do with this knowledge. To close, I'm going to give you a challenge. The challenge for me is, and this challenge is for me as well, try to identify areas in your life, not other people's lives, areas in your life where you may hold cognitive dissonance, and it could be of any type. It could be a philosophical dissonance, something more practical like smoking, it could be a religious issue, but try to identify things where you're not using logic to make your decisions, but you're using rationalization to make your decisions. That's my point here. Anyone read Greek? No? Okay. Put it in English. This is a quote from Socrates. It was quoted by Plato. It says, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And it's very, very widely used, but I really think it's true. Take a look at your life. Now, does anybody know who this guy is? Can you sit and tell me what he represents? Anyone?
Person.
No one knows this meme? Challenge accepted.
That's right.
Ah.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Oh,